and useful lessons there for the successes and failures that those different companies have had as they've tried to grapple with and address these gray areas directly or indirectly, as the case may be.
And do you think, any of those three have, or any others that you've seen, do they serve as that kind of model where people have really come away and significantly learned something?
Well, so in some cases, yes, we do see some improvements in some cases when it comes to hiring, when it comes to leadership. But I don't want to give the impression or suggestion that it's kind of a quick fix or a finite process, right? Because this is ongoing work. Companies have to take this work seriously. They have to remain committed to it, and they have to be prepared to respond when there are setbacks or issues. But I will say that the reason I include those three companies is that I think they are really helpful for looking at some of the different struggles and opportunities companies have faced as a result of this work.
And that, what you just say raises another question for me. How do you do this kind of work in the long run in an ongoing way, as opposed to, the sort of thing that you referred to that doesn't seem to work very well, which is just having a one-time seminar and then moving on? How do you refresh this? How do you perpetuate it? How do you continue it and develop it in a way that comes back to people and lets them check in and hopefully grow?
Yeah, well, this is a very social scientist answer, but I do think that it's really critical to look to the data. And I think it's really important to look at the research that does document what works and how we can do things that put into place long-term significant changes. I mentioned some examples of diversity task forces, mentoring programs. There are ways that organizations can change their recruitment strategies that have been shown to result in improvements to diversity at the entry level for companies. Companies can also be mindful of collecting data, setting goals, and measuring progress towards those goals. I think there's kind of a truism in corporate spaces that companies track and measure and have metrics for everything that they really care about. And so if you care about these issues of diversity, you've got to have data. You've got to measure what your numbers look like. You've got to set goals. You've got to have a plan in place for how you intend to achieve those goals. But I think that doing those things collectively helps to make sure that there's a long-term focus on addressing this over time and not a flash in the pan quick fix, because these issues aren't ones that will be fixed in a couple of hours by a seminar.
Right. And when you mention collecting data on everything, but diversity and how this progresses, it circles me back to a question that I had meant to ask earlier, which is, it seems like the marketplace or the market or it's such an interesting thing to define, because it's often so nebulous and it really is often, I think, a stand-in for what I want to do in terms of a manager or an owner or an employer. And I think that is used so frequently as an excuse to put systems in place or put targets in place which hold people of color back. And yet it's because it's such a moving target, it's difficult to argue against. How can you argue, well, this is what the market wants? And I guess maybe data is key to that. I mean, how do you get around the excuse that, well, the market doesn't really want this, and so we can't do this thing that's going to actually help, improve the situation with regard to discrimination and racism?
Yeah, that's a great question too. And in the book, I include some chapters from a respondent who talked about exactly that. So in the book, he's referred to as Brian. He's a film producer. And he talks about being in Hollywood, which has this reputation for being this very progressive, very liberal space. But he describes it as being very guided and driven by this market-based culture where whenever there was an effort to produce and develop a film with Black stars, about Black audiences, with Black directors, then the go-to was always, well, these films don't sell, they're not going to make money, there's no point in investing in them because they're just not going to get us the returns we want, so let's not bother. And one of the things that he noted with a lot of frustration was that, one, that logic was very selectively applied. And he pointed to a number of examples of white directors who directed films that did not make money, that still got multiple opportunities to continue making film after film after film. But the other thing that's instructive about that is that, to your point, data indicates that that is not actually accurate. And there are reports that show that for films that have a diverse cast and crew, the people who are actually making the film and the directorship and the cast of the film, those films actually overperform and they are more likely to see higher returns than is expected. But the logic actually really holds back these companies when they rely on it, because it inhibits them from going in this direction of being able to invest in films that are going to not only yield greater returns, but often kind of widen the landscape of what the industry is creating.
Yeah, it's a story that gets told again and again within that particular industry and a lot of different industries. But if you look at where the stories come from and who's telling the stories, it has a lot more to do with what their particular interests and are and where their advantages lie than it does to do with anything regarding actual facts. Right. And actual pieces of data that come from that. And as you say, the box office returns really tell the story in that regard. Right. So yeah, no, it's fascinating because there's so much, and I think that's just like one example of how the world as we perceive it, or the world that we have created from the stories that we tell ourselves, is one way, and the world as it exists in terms of hard fact and the way that it impacts people, especially people of color, is very much another, and we always have to really be cognizant of that. Adia, Harvey, Wingfield, again, the book is Gray Areas: How the Way We Work Perpetuates Racism and What We Can Do to Fix It. Thank you so much for taking the time today. I've really enjoyed speaking with you, and best of luck with your book.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Up next, we're going to talk about some corporate BS. I'm Beowulf Rockland. This is Facepalm America. Facepalm America, I'm Beowulf Rockland, and in the next few days, we're going to be speaking with Nick Hanauer. He's a pretty well-to-do guy. He's a billionaire and investor who has been very outspoken on some progressive issues, and the author Joan Walsh, who has been on MSNBC, who has written for many years for The Nation, and the two of them are going to talk about their book. The name of the book? Corporate Bullshit: Exposing the Lies and Half-Truths that Protect Profit, Power, and Wealth in America. And that will be interesting to me, especially talking to Nick Hanauer and asking him how come he isn't trying to protect his profit, power, and wealth, because he has a lot of it. It'll be interesting to see, and it'll be kind of fascinating to see where their approach comes from. I got this book, and I love the cover and the title. There's an awful lot of nonsense that gets spewed by major corporations, and it's good to hear folks talking about it who have been in the high-powered corporate circle of things. If we can internalize in that system a different way, a more equitable way of going about things that actually lets people live, there may be hope. And so stay tuned, coming up soon for our conversation again with Nick Hanauer and Joan Walsh as they talk about corporate bullshit. I'm Beowulf Rockland, and this is Facepalm America. I want to thank the producers of this program, Ace Elson and Rosabelle Hine. Please share a link to this podcast on your social media. It helps expose more people to the show, and it helps us grow what we do. And until next time, enjoy the day.